So it's a great pleasure to welcome the next speaker on stage. She is doing a PhD on coffee and climate change, which you probably have heard is very important, but it is very important. She loves coffee so much that she's actually together with the Norwegian Barista champion, Rory Rosenberg. Woohoo! And she's obsessed with figuring out how the sector can thrive also in the future. So please welcome on stage Milda Nordbø.
Hey. Good morning, everyone. And it's great to be here. I think it's on? No? Can you hear me? Yeah, cool. Thank you, Tim. And I would like to start with just figuring out who we are here. How many of us are producing coffee? 4. How many of you import coffee and export coffee? Okay, quite a bit more. How many of you roast coffee? Okay. And any baristas? A few? Cool. And how many of us love drinking coffee? Yeah. So my main message here today is that our ability to do what we love in the future, if it is growing coffee, roasting coffee, importing it, or drinking it, depends on the way we engage with the farmers. And not engage on Instagram, but a different kind of engaging. And Instagram is also very good. We like that too. But so that's what I'm going to talk about here today. So coffee is a natural resource that grows on trees. And as Morten told us yesterday, it is actually a result of a specific climate. And the thing is that the climate is changing.
Sorry.
No worries.
Feedback, that's why.
Okay. The climate is changing, and the coffee, are these two not friends? Maybe they're friends. I have 2 mics on.
It's a little low. So
Yeah, we're trying to turn up, but then we get feedback.
Okay. I can speak up?
yeah, I think that's better.
Yeah.
Thank you. Woo. Okay. I'll continue to speak up. Should I try this one instead?
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
I can
And
mute the other one.
off this one? Okay, back on track. Does this work?
Yes.
Cool. So, coffee is a natural resource that is quite sensitive to a specific climate. It grows in a very specific weather region. And because the climate is changing, the coffee growing has to change. Now, how's the climate changing? It's warming. It's us. We're causing it. We're sure. A while ago, we were not sure what's really like. Is it humans? Is it really climate change? Is it natural variations? Now we're sure. Humans are making the planet warmer. It's bad, and we can fix it. That's the kind of simple climate science. And there are 2 ways of trying to fix it. The one is cut emissions. So stop polluting, stop making the problem worse. The other one is adapt to what's already happening. And that's a little bit where we'll focus on today as well. Now, the coffee, which is a natural resource, sensitive to a changing climate, is grown by people. And people don't really like to change. So I would like you to start with turning to the person next to you and think about what was the last thing you ever tried to change in your life. It might be quit smoking, it might be start jogging, it might be whatever you tried to change. What did you try to change? How did it go? Please talk to each other. Okay. So I will try to make this a little bit of an interactive session. So I'll ask you to talk, and then I'll ask you to share, and then I'll ask you to talk and to share, and we'll do this a little bit. So, was it easy to make a change? Anyone wants to share what they tried to change? Please? Anyone? You gave up coffee for a month? Was that hard? No. Interesting, cool. Yeah. Life's better with coffee, isn't it? Yeah. Cool. Any other changes that people try to make? No.
I don't like change.
No, we don't like change. And it's not easy. But so the industry's ability to actually adapt in the future depends on the ability of the people growing a climate-sensitive crop in a very changing climate to manage change. And that's not easy. So if the people that are growing coffee fail to adapt, the industry actually suffers. So one of my questions is a little like, do we want to thrive or do we want to survive? So when we adapt, when we make the changes, we can kind of react to crises and just find a solution and make it work. But then we're just coping, we're surviving. Or we can thrive. We can make changes that make us not only cope with problems, but actually thrive. We can do better. And how would you like the coffee industry to be in 30 years, in 2050? Would you like it to just like survive and adapt a little bit to things that are going to happen all the time? Or would you like it to be able to thrive? Which one? Thrive. Cool. Now what's the difference between surviving and thriving? Thriving is long-term. Surviving is short-term. When you're exposed to a certain stress or shock, it can be in your personal life, but it can also be with a changing climate, your ability to respond to that stress or shock, if you surviving, you just cope, and your coping mechanism makes you worse off than before you actually met the stress or the shock. If you're thriving, the stress or the shock just triggers you to reorganize your resources in a way that you're just able to continue doing what you do well under different conditions. So, what does that mean? Because the people are growing coffee in a changing climate. And again, the industry depends on the people's capacity to change and to adapt to a changing climate. And what do people need to do that? They need to be able to manage risk and uncertainty, because with a changing climate, things are not certain anymore. And they need to then have skills to plan. Like, okay, so this is happening, how do I plan for change? Then they need to learn from, okay, that didn't work, and reorganize for things to work. But even more importantly, they need to be willing to change. And that depends on the financial and psychological flexibility of people. So you might even know how to manage risk and uncertainty, but you might not have the money to actually do that. And if you don't, you're not going to make the necessary changes, and then you're not going to be able to adapt, and you're not going to be able to produce coffee in the future. So for the industry to succeed, we need to make sure that the farmers growing the coffee are able to manage risk and uncertainty and are willing to change. Do you think farmers are able to manage risk and uncertainty now and are willing to change? What do you think? What's your gut feeling?
Gut feeling, no.
No. Farmers are different. Farmers are different in different regions. Some are able, some are not. How does climate change affect coffee? The demand for coffee is growing. There's, for the first time in a long history, the last 3 years, there's starting to be a bigger demand than supply of coffee. So there's a coffee deficit globally. And the demand is expected to double by 2050. And that's good news for the coffee industry. But the land suitable for growing coffee in the regions that we know how to grow coffee well now is expected to decrease by half. Some research shows this is not, but it's hard to, research is always hard to communicate, because in order to be really specific, I have to tell you so many things, and it might be that way, it might not be that way, but then you're not really left with anything like, what does that even mean? So the ability to grow coffee in the future is going to be drastically changed. We might be able to find new land to grow coffee on, but again, it requires people. So how does climate and coffee relate to each other? It gets warmer. And because coffee likes to grow in a very specific temperature range, it actually just stops producing as much and stops being of such high quality. So what you do is that you grow coffee in a mountain. You can creep upwards where it's colder, right? But then you need to stop growing coffee at a certain altitude. And then you need to start growing coffee in a new altitude. Now, the people that are growing coffee, they would rather give up growing coffee than move to a different place. People are more attached to the place than the job that they have. So then teaching new people how to grow coffee will take time. Also, other kinds of crops are grown there, so you're going to have to remove either forests, which will contribute to even more climate change. So going upwards is it's not a simple solution. The weather is less predictable, and the coffee farmers that are here can say that they have experienced that already. There will be more frequent and intense weather events. There will be more rain that sometimes damages the coffee flowers, and then when you don't have a coffee flower, you don't really have a lot of coffee cherries. There's also intense droughts. We also have diseases like coffee leaf rust. Some farmers are losing up to 85% of their crop. Some are just 15%. And we have pests like the coffee borer, then testy bug. And the reason why they increase is because when it gets warmer, the eggs that the bugs lay hatch quicker. So then the new bugs, the babies, grow up quicker, then they lay eggs, and then those eggs hatch again, and then you have more generations of a pest within a season, just because it gets warmer. So going back to this combination of coffee, climate, and people, we need the people to be able to handle the changing climate. And again, the people need to be able to manage risk and uncertainty, and they need to be willing to change. Now I'm going to go through a list of potential options of how we can do that, how we can contribute to making that happen. This is not a recipe for success because we don't actually know how to do it. We just know that these factors might enable farmers to actually adapt better and thrive. So what you can do is that you can help farmers to develop networks. And why is that so crucial? Because if a farmer's network stops at the family level and things are changing externally and they don't know how to handle that change and not really willing because they're not getting, like they don't have the finances to make the change, then they're just going to stop growing coffee. But if they have a wider network to draw on, other farmers in the area, buyers, cooperatives, they can engage with each other and they can be like, okay, this is happening. How do we plan? How do we reorganize? What can we do? Let's experiment. You do this, I do this, what works better? And then we share the costs. They can do insurance together. They can apply for loans together to finance things. Things are easier together. So if you can somehow tap into developing farmers' networks, that will help your own industry to thrive. This is a strange one. Research shows that increasing employability outside of the sector actually helps adapting within the sector. And so if you manage to somehow, if the farmers are able to, in hard times, go and work outside of coffee, they can actually diversify their risks. So when there will be a hard year, they can actually work somewhere else. Or when the crop is low, they can part-time work somewhere else and use that income to reinvest in coffee. And that means that they won't leave coffee when shit really hits the fan. Ensure farmer profitability. Creating change, making changes costs money. If you need new varieties, if you need fungicides, or if you want to grow organic coffee, things take time and they cost money. If you're not making money, if you're barely making things go around, you're not going to invest in making the necessary changes. Develop environmental awareness. That means that the farmers kind of need to know what's happening and why it's happening. I've just come back from research in Burundi, and Burundi is a very specific, different kind of origin. But when the farmers believe that the climate is changing because God wants it to change, you're not going to be able to create the necessary changes because people won't think that what they do matters. but it does. And what we do matters. We all part of this value chain that's actually making the changes that will end up in a certain future that we want. So developing environmental awareness is also crucial for people to know how to plan for the future changes. Invest in local knowledge. It turns out that a lot of times people actually know how to deal with rust. People know how to do things. People know how to deal with heavy rains and how to irrigate without creating an irrigation system. But they don't do it because they're not willing, or because they don't have the money, or because they don't know that it's necessary. So all of these kind of need to work together somehow and draw on each other. So if you develop an environmental awareness of what's coming, if you have a network that you're part of where you together find out, okay, this is coming, what do we do? Local knowledge, what have we always done? What has worked before? How can we combine those things to actually make sure that we thrive in the future? Use suitable climate technology, and that's where the coffee industry is really good. They're developing new varietals that can handle warmer weather, that are more disease resistant. And that's great, but they take time to develop, and they sometimes also forget the people aspect, because people need to be willing to actually make the changes. So these are just some of the things. And what I'm going to ask you to do now for actually about 5 minutes or 10 minutes even, is to talk 2 and 2 or 3 and 3 and think, where are the strengths? You're already somewhere slap bang in the middle of a value chain that you work with. And that, in the end, ends up with coffee farmers that have to adapt to the changes. So where can you see the strengths in the way you're working? Where can you tap into what's already happening and where people are good at the source? And how can we build on that? How can we enhance that? So let's start with what's already good and work from there. And I would like you to then choose a point or two. Where do you see the strengths? What can you, as a roaster, as a barista, as an importer, do to enhance these aspects so the farmers are able to adapt? And then I would like you to send me an email or a message with whatever you come up with. That way, I will kind of know what's already happening, because I'm sure we're full of solutions, all of us already. And when you, sometime in the field, maybe 2 years later, and you're wondering, I remember someone talking about this, you can find that you send me an email and you can be like, what do I do again? And we can find a way. Okay? So, where are the strengths? What can you build on? 5 to 10 minutes. Go. And press send.
Okay.
Thank you. So, while they're coming in, let's hear. What did you discuss? Did anyone discuss anything about developing farmers' networks? No.
Yeah,
You
we
did?
touched upon
Cool.
that, yeah.
What did you come up with?
He has very good notes.
He has very good notes.
I've got a few words.
Yeah?
So there's mainly talking about events like this and helping implement them in their networks and have more sharing of information and this type of forum with producers.
This type of forum with producers. Crucial. Great idea. Continue doing that. And spread the love. Increase employability outside of coffee. Anyone discuss that? It's a bit of a touchy one, isn't it? Why would we want to invest in that? No? Yeah?
I mean, at least what we discussed is that if you are able to somehow help producers to be able to send their kids to school to a certain extent, supporting local communities with education. A lot of these other things are coming with a higher educational level.
Yeah.
Especially like you were mentioning Burundi. I know people are, there's people, kids that never get to do even primary school.
Yeah.
So somehow a lot of these things are dependent on future generations that are more educated.
Yes, and that's very true. And in Burundi, the average education span is 2 years, so people have gone to school 2 years. So that is crucial. But for the existing farmers, unless they actually can diversify their income, sending their kids to school is great, and I think that's really important. But in order not to leave coffee now, you also need to spread your risks in terms of where your income comes from. So that's just food for thought. And what about the others? What else came up? I don't have time to go through each one.
Ensure farmer profitability.
Yep, ensure farmer profitability.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things that you can. I think there's a lot of things that you can do on this point actually, but I'm very intrigued by maybe helping them become even better farmers by having other agricultural products.
Yes.
That can grow when it's too warm or too high altitudes or too rainy or rah rah.
And that totally kind of leads to non-employability, but it actually does diversify your risk. So that's really important.
Absolutely.
But increase farmer profitability, basically what that means is that this is just one of the important factors. So just paying more does not mean that people will be able to adapt more, because they need all the other things. So I look forward. I'm still getting the messages, thank you. Just to kind of sum up. People, coffee, climate. These focus on people, and only this one focuses on coffee. But in order for the coffee to thrive, the people need to thrive, and that needs all these things to be in place. So when you do plan your activities in the future, whatever company you're in, just try to remember that your future success depends on the people's success, and to be able to have those aspects. Just a long quote to wrap up. A key challenge for industries that choose collectively and proactively to adapt to changing climatic conditions will be to ensure the sufficient capacity exists across scales, across individuals, communities, regions, and nations. So my question to you is basically, do we as an industry choose to adapt to a changing climatic condition? And are we willing to ensure that the capacity exists across all scales? I hope we make that choice, because we can. And I hope that we remember that coffee is a result of climate and people. Thank you.